Tonisha, all okay.
Oh, great. Uh, Good evening. I can see that our attendees have started joining already, and we are also live. As you know, we'll start sharp at 5. So, thank you for bearing with us.
Hi, Shrimoi.
Hello, Shrimadi. Uh,
Yes.
it feels so strange to hit the final session already in some ways. Good evening. We can see the attendees joining. As you know, we'll start sharp at 5. So bear with us. We'll go live. We are already live. We'll begin the session at 5 o'clock. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I hope I am audible. The attendees are still joining, and we are also waiting for our speaker to join. So, um, hopefully, we can start on time. All right, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are, Shubham.
Uh, yes. Okay, so once again, a very good evening to everyone who has joined and all those who are joining and who will be joining us, both on the WebEx platform as well as on the YouTube. This would be a final good evening because we have reached the fifth session of this 5 day online international FDP that we have been having, that is on introducing digital humanities. So far, it has been a grand success, I must say, though I am the coordinator, but I'm very happy with the kind of response we had right at the beginning, and I'm very, very happy with the kind of response we have continued to have in all the sessions with very, very engaging question answer sessions and a very lively participation as far as possible, of course, on the platform that we are having. So it's a bit strange for us to think that we finally kind of come at the end of the road, but everything that starts has to finish, and everything that good has to finish also. That something great must also come and follow. So here we are on the final day with our final session of our FDP. And I am, of course, Dr. Srimoy Guhu Thakurta from the Department of History, Scottish Church College, your host for the day and your one of the coordinators along with me. I also have Dr. Varvi Roy from the Department of Philosophy, Scottish Church College, and Dr. Tonisha Guin from IIT Jodhpur. Today, we will also be joined by Porichoy Patro, who is the coordinator of DH at IIT. He will be chairing today's session. So, welcome, Porichoy, and it's good to have you with us for the full session. And we will start as soon as our speaker actually joins us. He has informed that he'll be joining soon. So, as soon as he joins, we can start with the session. But before that, just the usual roundup of the rules that I think all of us are quite accustomed to now, but still I need to repeat so that we can maintain a sense of decorum during the sessions. That is, we will be taking questions throughout the session. The form has already been shared with you It is there in the emails, which also contain your meeting links and your YouTube links. So kindly please use only that link to ask your questions. It will be easy for the chair to have access to questions, and then take it to our speaker. We will be sharing a feedback form right at the end of today's session. It will be seen or also accepted as your attendance. And you know that we have been sharing the recordings as well as a small exercise along with another feedback form following each of the sessions. And this will be no exception. You will again receive a mail from us with today's recording, an exercise, and a feedback form. All of this will be considered when we decide upon issuing our certificate. One of the clauses we had put in the brochure is that you have to attend all the sessions in order to receive a certificate of participation. But since we had some technical glitches in the first session, we came up with all these other measures in order for us to uh, do justice to all of those participants who have judiciously been with us from day one till today. So thank you so much for your cooperation, and we hope to see you cooperating with us again for this final session, of course. Regarding certification, I would also like to mention that you need to give us a bit of time. Will take a bit of time to kind of go through all the feedback, the exercises, and everything that has come back to us. And we will be issuing certificates accordingly. And since we are dealing with a huge number, uh, we will be taking our time a bit because we don't want to make any mistakes, or we don't want to deny anyone. So we will take our time so that we can do the work properly and efficiently. So kindly wait and have patience with us as we are able to go through all our feedback and decide upon certification. I can see that our speaker has already joined. So, welcome, Professor Ghosh, to the final session of our online FGP. Welcome, sir.
Yes,
Am I
good
on?
afternoon to everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, you are audible.
Yeah, I'm sorry there was some problem with the password. So, though I was there in the meeting, could not be spotted. So,
Okay,
finally,
no issues. Now you're here, I guess. So, as you know, and this is an official welcome to you then to our online FGP that we have been having. This is a collaborative activity between Scottish College and IIT, and we are having this FGP on say to our participants on the story of the DH, starting with what it exactly may mean to any individual who are taking up the topic in itself, to how we can approach DH in academics, to how we can approach DH pedagogically. And today you will be talking on how we can exercise DH, I think, in the context of India. I think it's a perfect way to bring the story to an end and to have a conclusion to what we had begun. Today's session will be chaired by our very own Polichai Patel. Polichai, can you hear me? Yeah.
Your voice is breaking. Am I audible and visible?
Yes,
Uh,
Purushar.
you are audible. Yes, yes.
Let's begin then. So,
Okay.
thank you. It's a great pleasure to have Professor Arjun Ghosh with us today. Professor Ghosh is a professor at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Delhi. He also served as an adjunct professor here in IIT Jodhpur for 2 successive academic years, specifically for our Digital Humanities Interdisciplinary Research Platform. This is the last and the concluding session of our faculty development program that is being jointly organized by the 2 partner institutions, IIT Jodhpur and Scottish Church College. And we have Professor Ghosh with us, who doesn't need an introduction to our audience. Still, as it's customary, let me briefly introduce him. Professor Ghosh specializes in theater and performance studies and in digital humanities. He has several books and articles to his credit. Those who are interested in theater and performance must be knowing his works, especially his translation of Bijan Bhattacharya's Navanno, his book on his monograph on Jananatya Manch, his book on copyright laws published by IIAS Shimla, if I'm not mistaken, and several articles published in different journals and books. Professor Ghosh and his peers, several DH scholars in India, are intimately associated with Dharti. Perhaps our participants know about Dharti. They must be knowing about it by now. So the Digital Humanities Association that we have in India, I can't recall the full form right now. Sorry about it. It must be Digital Humanities Association for Research and Teaching Innovations, if I'm not mistaken. And Professor Ghosh and other members of Dharti have organized quite a few DH conferences and workshops so far. If you're interested, you can Google Dharti, find out, and please engage, please connect with it. So on that note, I'd like to hand it over to Professor Ghosh. Thank you again for being here with us today. Ojinda, now it's all yours.
Thank you, Porichai. It's great to meet you again, albeit virtually. And I'm happy to be part of this faculty development program on DH. And yes, as Porichai mentioned, that Dharti is the organization that is currently looking after uh, the growth and trying to facilitate the growth and understanding of digital humanities in India. And very recently, participants should be very happy to know that Dharti has received affiliation to the international body for DH, which is the ADHO, Association of Digital Humanities Organizations. And so that was a very, very, very important moment. In fact, we must also note that a team of very young scholars from IIT Jodhpur actually won the Best Paper Award at the recently concluded DH 2023 conference. So certainly, DH in India is at a very important moment. And what I am going to talk about today is about how DH in India uh, has certain challenges if it really wants to be DH in India and not DH imported to India. And in order to understand that, I want to try and tell a long story in short. And that story is the story of communication. Because at the end of the day, for scholars of humanities, language is a very, very important issue. And the use of language and language as a modicum of communication between people, between communities, is I have argued uh, elsewhere, and that's one of the important aspects that I look at in my work, is the linkages between culture and technology. And therefore, here we look at the linkages between communication and language with technology. So, as technology has progressed, the use of language has also changed, and much of the discussions that you would have had, I imagine, in the previous sessions, would have talked about how we use language to analyze texts, right? Texts or cultural data. And the interesting part of it is that in the digital media, uh, language actually, operates at two levels. One is the level which is visible to the normal eye, that is at the level of, let us say, the screen. So if you take a book or a sheet of paper, whatever written is that is written on it, whatever appears on it, is exactly what is written, right? Yes, scholars of literature or history will tell us that, or law will tell us that what is written needs to be interpreted. So that could be another layer, but that layer begins after the written layer, right? However, in the case of the digital media, it is different. Like right now, you have a screen before you, I imagine, whatever it be. You're probably watching this entire thing on the YouTube, on YouTube live. Uh, but what you see on your screen is only one layer. There is an entire layer of algorithm that is actually making that transmission possible, and and that too is a language. It's written in a language. It's written in a machine language, which communicates between humans and machines. What you see on the screen is language communicating between humans and humans. So I argue that the digital that the digital era of communication, there is a fundamental change in that. uh, if you look at history, human beings have communicated across four epochs. All right. The first epoch is that of the oral and performative. The oral and performative is where all the resources that you need for communicating with another person is present with you at all times. That is, the only real resource that you really need is the human body. It could be gestural, it could be it could be vocal, and in order to listen also, that is the only technology that is required. Or it's not a technology, it's absence of technology rather. And another characteristic of oral and performative expressions is that knowledge exists in the body of the knower, right? So knowledge can only pass from one person to another through recitation, through speech, and it can happen at a shared time and space. So people will have to stay at one place in order for that to happen, right? That's the nature of oral transmission. But then you come to manuscript, all right? So for the first time, you need something. So you need three things, which is outside the body. One is you need a surface to write on, and you need a stylus, a pen, or or even a hammer and chisel to write with, right? You might need, depending on what stylus you're using, you might need a third thing, which is the ink. And each of these have to be produced and and put together. So it exists outside the body. But with writing, something that happens is the knowledge can now be transmitted onto a different surface, and that has a life of its own, right? That can exist outside of. So a person may not be physically present, but the knowledge continues, right? However, in manuscript universe, knowledge only gets passed on from one to another, uh, you know from one manuscript to another by physical copying, right? So there are very few and far between, even though it is possible that now, since people don't have to travel in order to exchange thoughts, there each scholar would have more ideas to refer to when sort of studying a particular idea, right? So there can be a greater possibility of disputation and cross-referencing. But even then, the number of texts that are available are still quite limited. It's a number of ideas that are available at hand for any particular scholar at any particular library is still limited, because the manuscript process is laborious, right? Labor intensive, and also it is quite expensive, because imagine to produce one text in one copy of a Bible in medieval Europe, you probably have to cut down scores of sheep, produce the parchment for it. So it's pretty expensive, and it's a laborious process, right? It is similar to thinking of how handloom saris are made. Sometimes handloom saris can go to be as expensive as 50,000-60,000 rupees or even more, right? So you can imagine that how expensive they can be in terms of the labor input and the raw material, etc. So manuscripts were not particularly very were not very abundant in their availability. But then print changes that. With print, one could produce a first copy. So one could produce a single page, the typeface of a single page, and then it could make multiple impressions. And therefore, you had a very large number of copies available. And that exponential growth of circulation of texts meant that libraries could be really large, and multiple ideas could be verifiable, right? And that, of course, that kind of is what really fuels the Renaissance, and the growth of science, rationality in Europe, in you know. And but what does the digital moment do? With the digital moment, you have a situation now with print. Something that happens is that with print, you have a single page from which you can take 500, 5,000, 50,000 impressions, and each of the pages are sent. There is standardization everywhere. But with the digital, now you have a situation where you can reach that mass audience, but yet through that second layer. Right now you are watching me on YouTube, but if you go to your YouTube homepage, YouTube will give you a suggested list of videos to watch, and that suggested list of videos will be different for each of the participants in this room, in this meeting right now. So even though YouTube is a medium of mass communication, it is customized to each person. So it is customized as well as mass. And that is what it was in the oral and performative universe, right? Because if I'm explaining to one student, if I were to give this talk to, if you were there in the room, I would give it in one way. But if I were to give this talk to another group somewhere else, depending on their feedback, and when one is in person, there is a lot of feedback. Right now in this meeting, there is no feedback. I only see myself. But so I cannot really customize it in that sense. But of course, I'm customizing given the requirement of this FDP, given that this is the last session of the FDP. So you've already gone through a series of lectures on digital humanities, and I'm trying to place some context to it. So to that level, I'm customizing it, right? So if you think of this as an oral presentation, I can customize. But if this were a book that I have written, for every reader that reads that book, I cannot customize it. So, but the digital becomes mass as well as customizable at the same point of time, right? So, from that point of view, we understand that there are certain affordances of each particular technology, and they are going to affect the way we communicate with and use each of these communication mechanisms. Now, returning back to print for a moment, let's say that one of the important technologies of print that you may have encountered, particularly those who are slightly senior, may be aware of particular technologies of print like typewriter. Okay. Many of you may not have actually been to a printing press that actually puts letters together, but maybe you would have seen a typewriter. Now, what happened? And you certainly know your laptop or computer keyboard, right? Now, just imagine how the keyboard of your computer is different from the keyboard of your smartphone. The computer keyboard is actually modeled on the keyboard of the typewriter, right? So you get the QWERTY arrangement. Whereas there is no physical keyboard to your smartphone. You can attach one with Bluetooth or whatever and attach one, but it doesn't come with one, right? Now it so happens if you were to write in some other language other than English or non-Latinate language, French and Spanish will probably not give so much of a problem. With French, there are some keyboards which some characters which will require accents. That will be require some special consideration. But for Indian languages, for example, some of them have more than 50 characters, or actually much more in terms of the ligatures and the conjoined composite characters, right? It is far more difficult to actually work with the physical keyboard. Now, when writing happened through printing, through physical mechanisms like the keyboard, the QWERTY keyboard, it automatically made uh, the the English language more dominant, right? Because English language was the language through which the Latin characters actually transmitted throughout the world. So it's easier to say in English than to say in Tamil or Marathi, or whatever, because in print. So the resources of the English language is far more well developed. It's not that English is easier. It's just that technology has been adopted to a certain particular language, and that language is benefiting from that synergy that is created between technology and language. So there was a point of time where scholars or critics would argue that because of the nature of the keyboard, the fact that most typing, especially after coming of the internet, you see your web addresses and everything, actually, no matter what language you use, the web address, you might be using uh, email, emailing in, let us say, some Indian language, but the email address or the IP address of the email site is still written in Latin languages, because that is how the technology has established itself. So this privileging of the Latin script and thereby the English language is something that became a concern among many scholars, especially scholars of cultural politics. But if you look at your smartphone today, we find that there is no physical keyboard. There is actually a virtual keyboard, and you can actually install a virtual keyboard in any language you want. And you can actually have multiple layouts per language, right? So if you go on to Google and you ask Google to give you a keyboard in Bangla, it will give you a choice. Even in Bangla, they will give you a choice, either Bangla India or Bangla Bangladesh, right? Depending on what kind of predictive text that is going to be used. So what we are seeing is, with the digital, this customizability is actually probably trying, can possibly bring back the multiplicity of languages, right? Those of you who have read Benedict Anderson know that print, by its very process, the fact that single typeface, single composed page, gives rise to a large number of printed pages which circulate through the length and breadth of a particular political domain, gives rise to a linguistic sort of imagined community, and therefore in linguistic nationalism. And in our country too, we have seen how after the language movement, states got consolidated into homogeneous languages, even though there might have been multiple languages. Like if you look at Bangla, for example, Bangla is spoken very differently across various places in West Bengal, but the school textbooks are all printed in the same language. So that leads to a certain, because there is a certain press and there is a certain academic process through which one arrives at that uh, standardized language and pedagogy and curriculum, etc., etc. And then, because that has immediately empowers those who actually are in charge of the printing processes. Now, I am arguing that barrier of print, of the single keyboard or the single typeface, is something that gets broken through the digital, which is infinitely customizable, right? So even small language communities can now possibly bring in, I'm not saying it is there, but can possibly bring in resources that are applicable to those language communities, right? Now, what I am going to move to is, again, to move to the domain of print. And in fact, that domain where print comes from Europe to India. We know that print as a technology develops in Europe. There are other technologies which did not develop in Europe. For example, paper, or the use of paper for manuscript writing. Paper, of course, originates somewhere in China, and then it moves to Arabia. Now, we know of the Islamic Golden Age, the fascinating growth of 500 centuries of science, philosophy, technology, culture, medicine, which the European Renaissance sort of borrows. That flourishing could not have happened without paper, because that's the kind of learning and exchange that paper makes possible. But when it comes to Europe in the 15th and 16th centuries, it is print that actually makes uh, that moment possible, the moment of the arrival of rationality, which I have already touched upon. So print gets imported into the colonies through colonialism, through colonial uh, administrators. Now, when colonial administrators come already to come to the colonies, they come with an administrative mindset which is sort of framed according to the documentary mode of thinking. Now, I told you that in the oral and performative universe, authenticity does not exist outside the body. Authenticity exists in the body, right? So, uh, so therefore, in pre-colonial times in India, things like land records and other kinds of social records, etc., are were customary, right? Yes, there will be the occasional documentation, the sanad here and the farman there, but largely land ownerships and land owning, much of land ownership was community oriented anyway, right? They wasn't that kind of documentation. A farmer will not be able to, or a peasant will not be able to prove through a document that this is my piece of land, right? It is because it is more customary. But when the Europeans come to these colonies, they look for specific kind of documentation, and they carry out immense documentation themselves. You have the Geological Survey of India, the Anthropological Survey of India, etc., constantly maintaining lists, and then you have ultimately the census. So this kind of documentation becomes a tool for governance. The moment you are trying to bring things down to documentation, we know that documentation leaves very little space for fuzzy boundaries. So, for example, you would have writers, authors, or not writers really, I mean, bards, poets, who would be there in medieval uh, India, who would be composing or uh, composing poetry in multiple languages, right? Or even in their poetry, we'd find influences of multiple languages sort of coming in, because there is no fixed composition. These are not things that are, it's through recitation, depending on the audience, depending on the context, you'd move between languages. But moment print comes into being, or documentation comes into being, it stabilizes. Writing does not change, right? Writing remains stable, isn't it? So now all these definitions get fixed. What was customary gets fixed. And as a result of that, we find that, uh, you know, that there are if you look at one of the things that happened is that we had a language like uh, Hindustani or Hindavi or Kadiboli, which was the lingua franca of large part of the Indian subcontinent. Right? It was a language that was born in the Urs, that is the 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 Arabic, okay, mixture of Persian, Arabic, Turki, Hindavi, Bhojpuri, Braj Bhasha, various languages. And people would talk. This was not an official language. People would speak in the bazaars, in the towns, in the ghats. But when it is to be written down, it didn't have a script. In fact, this is true worldwide. Across the world, there are many, many languages, right? But there are fewer scripts. If you look at Europe, you find that all these languages, whether it be French or it be English or it be Spanish, these were, when they got vernacularized, they adopted the Latin script as their script. Similarly, when this lingua franca of India, known to people in various names, people had to write something down. Depending on their convenience, they would write it down in either the Persian script or the Nastaliq script, or write it in the Nagri script, right? And in places like Bengal, it would perhaps be written uh, in the Bangla script also in some cases. In Kerala or the Malabar, it would be written in the Malayalam script, right? You have something called Arabi Malayalam also, right? Or if you have a movement between Gurumukhi and Shamukhi also, right? So that kind of of facility of language was there. Now, what the British did, and to cut a long story short, I'm sure many of you are aware of Professor Alok Rai's book on Hindi nationalism. He has given this history. I'm just drawing upon it. That once uh, the British come in fact, Grierson in the Fort William College makes a choice of printing Hindustani texts for Hindu students in Devanagari and for Muslim students in Urdu. If you read Professor Francisca Orsini's work, she would note in places like Banaras, Lucknow, Allahabad, and because many of the Hindus, they were better versed with Persian rather than the Nagari script because they were clerks in the Lucknow port or whatever, and they would make composition. In fact, Premchand, who is a very important, Munshi Premchand, very important writer of Hindi, much of his work was written in Nastalik, right? So the point that I'm trying to make is once print comes in, print sort of made this segregation between Urdu and Hindi. Hindi for the Hindus, Urdu for the Muslims. And as a result of that distinction, that down the from the knave to the chaps division is something that ultimately leads to, and I'm not saying this is the only reason, but this is a very important reason of a differentiation of mindset, a differentiation of consciousness, which ultimately leads to the two nation theory and a separation of the subcontinent. A separation which did not conclude in 1947. We continue to make these distinctions even today. Even now, the partition of the subcontinent is an unfinished project, which there are forces which are trying to complete that process. And it has led to a great fissure within the life in the subcontinent. So, what I have just recounted in the last 10 minutes or so is the violence that the import of a documentary consciousness, of a consciousness was that took root in Europe and supplanted within the subcontinent, the decontextualization of it, and the violence that supplanting of a documentary consciousness. We don't know if suppose we for a moment think of a contrafactual situation where colonialism didn't happen. Would we not have a documentary consciousness? Would we not have had print? We would perhaps had. Right? There were many ways in which there were print technologies throughout Asia, including in India. Right? But not with the kind of consciousness that developed in Europe. Maybe there would have been an alternative consciousness, may have been good, may have been bad, but that's contrafactual. I now want to look at the moment of the digital. Here you are, I have just recounted that in the digital, customization is a possibility. But for that customization, for you to be able to type out your language on the smartphone, to be able to convert your smartphone into the language that you are comfortable in, you need the development of a certain technology. Every user cannot do it. Someone has to develop the technology. It has to be on the agenda for technology development. Now I come to digital humanities. One of the things that happens in digital humanities is analysis of texts, analysis of digitized texts. It may be data also, but data has to be available in a digital format, digitally accessible format. And how does this happen? Now we know that we have many documentary records. We have these archives, right? And there is a sizable effort for digitization. And digitization is not easy. It is a time consuming, labor intensive, and capital intensive process. It requires a lot of funding and time and institutional support, right? So first you have to digitize them. Now digitization is not a single level process, right? I'm sure you are aware. First you take a manuscript or a printed text, an old journal or something, and there you have an image scan of it. But that will only allow you to preserve that stuff. Or maybe if you are going to load it onto a website, allow people to access it remotely, from remotely. But to be able to load it onto a website is quite expensive because images are heavy. But if I, and the only way I can search through those set of image scans of a manuscript or a book or a journal is on the basis of the metadata that is provided by the archivist. After that, you have to scroll page by page. Each time a page will load and you have to go through it. Whereas if you go to a resource like Google Books or Hathi Trust, you would find when you give a search string, if the book is in English, it picks out the references from within the texts and gives you a relevant result. It doesn't only look at the title of the text or the keywords. With image scans, you are limited to only the title of the text and the keywords or the author, right? So you need to convert those image scans into optical character read texts so that you have digitized text. And digitized texts are lighter. They load onto your computer or store on a server at a fraction of the cost of the scanned images. Now, once you have it digitized, not only can your keyword searches become much more intelligent, but it also makes possible for text analysis, word counts, word clouds, topic modeling, and sentiment analysis, etc., etc. I'm sure you are aware of these concepts. So first is the question of us having to do that digital scan. For the first thing, do we have good OCR engines for Indian languages in India? For the Indian languages or the South Asian languages? The answer is yes and no. Yes, some languages like Hindi or Bangla have pretty good resources, but and Bangla not because of the efforts made by India, but the efforts made by people in Bangladesh is in fact I would argue that that one thing that the partition saved is the Bangla language, perhaps. Is the but there are many other languages which do not have good resources. And when I say good resources, it means everything. Yes, today you run an engine like Tesseract and it will give you very authentic kind of uh, OCR for Hindi or even for Bangla. Pretty good, almost 95% accuracy. This is pretty good. But how many people can run Tesseract? But for English, you look around, or for some of the European languages or some other languages in the world, you have resources like point and shoot. You can take your phone, show it on a page, and it will give you the OCR straight away, or read it and interpret it and translate it for you. That kind of resources. So it's this resource battle is always a competition. You read, so they can even be better and better such resources. So there's a lot of catch up to be done for the Indian languages. Point number one, that is at the level of OCR, moving from image scans to digitized scans. I'll come back to image scans at a certain time, but once again, hopefully in the lecture. But for now, let us move on. What's the next step? Now you have all these digitized texts. You have them in machine readable format. but you want to run a topic modeling exercise on it. So basically topic modeling and stuff like that, or something like stylistics, stylometry, these tools depend on certain mechanisms called natural language processing, where one analyzes the grammatical structure of a language and picks out, let us say you have something called the automatic place or proper noun detection, right? It will detect the name of places in the entire text according to a certain grammatical structure. Now these NLP, the natural language processing models are developed by NLP researchers for specific languages. So if you want to read a certain text through an NLP model, you need a development of that particular text, that a model in that particular text. And that is where the Indian languages are not doing very well. Especially for historical texts. There is research among the linguists for various Indian languages, under-resourced languages also, but they mostly work with contemporary data. But you want to understand that vocabulary changes, vocabulary and word usage changes over time, and the word usage changes. So we need to have NLP, which is much more robust for a larger time period for most Indian languages, and that is a work in progress. Then when we go to things like sentiment analysis, what does sentiment analysis do? It picks up certain words and characterizes them according to certain sentiments, either very simply as positive sentiment or negative sentiment, or things like anger or melancholy and all those kinds of finer sentiments also. Depends on what kind of models. Now, when these models are imported from European side, even if they are written in English, Indian language usage is very, very different in many cases from Indian usage of English is very different from English usage in other contexts. So if I take English usage model which is there in the United States and just supplant them in India, then the results may not be accurate. But most importantly, we wouldn't even know that it is not accurate. Today we have governance structures which are making use of these automatic algorithms. And when I say governance structures, I do not only mean the elected governments, corporate governance also. So for example, what is hate speech? What is fake news? Do we have these social media sites? Can they automatically pick up what is hate speech, what is fake news, when users, hundreds and thousands and millions of users are using them in the Indian languages? Can they probably sometimes flag wrong messages and shut down wrong accounts because their algorithms are not trained properly in the Indian languages? We have these highest number of internet shutdowns in the world. Why? Because we have languages in which people are transmitting hate speech, which we cannot detect. It's not possible to detect through manual effort. So rather, let us stop it because we do not have enough algorithms. So questions of corporate governance. Moreover, these language models will also make decisions on things like what kind of resources to provide to particular communities. Because you run a model on a certain set of data from the social media and decide, okay, this particular community needs more water. Let us send water to them. Okay, just giving you an example. So governance decisions will also take place according to these kind of automatic algorithms. That's the way we are moving. If you're aware of the kind of governance models that are coming in nowadays. So I am arguing that because these models are imported, they will make wrong decisions. And they will repeat the same mistakes that the import of documentary culture had on the Indian subcontinent, leading to the partition of the country. And we are already seeing it. Hate speech and fake news is not the problem of the future, it is a problem of today. Right? So, therefore, I wanted to suggest that we need to develop our technologies rather than being a net importer of technologies. And we need to invest in Indian languages, in providing customized tools for Indian languages. Who is going to provide these customized tools? These customized tools cannot be provided by large corporates, which are determined by profit, whose motives are determined by profit. These has to be bottom up, people oriented effort. There needs to be, it has to be, it's not only a technocratic solution that is required. What is required is a solution that constantly critiques. There is a subject of study today which is called critical code analysis. We need to be able to, just the way in which a student of humanities would be reading a text and provide critical commentary on it and suggest what the politics of a text is. We need to be able to look behind YouTube and look at that algorithm and give a critique of its politics. Who will do that? If not humanities scholars. But unfortunately, in our classrooms, we do not have humanities scholars who can read code. I would argue that basic coding knowledge is something that should be there, part of every humanities curriculum. Finally, I want to point out to another, and I told you I'll talk to you about the digital scans, and that is what I want to talk about. And that is this digital scanning of texts. We know that there are many archives in the country. You know, if anybody wants to research on colonial India, they probably need to go and sit in the India Office Library in London. I mean, the British Library's India Office collections, right? That's expensive. It requires a certain amount of fellowship, a scholarship, etc. Not everybody can access it, and therefore scholars in India find it. Yes, part of the British Library's digitized collections are now accessible online, and you can get print on demand, but only part of it, not everything. But what is happening? So far, we had one part of it, of an advantage, that there were local archives, people's personal collections, where scholars from India could go and maybe access and not have to pay the air tickets to UK or Europe or USA to fund their research. So much more cost effective. Western scholars could also come. They, in such situation, they had to claim the fellowships. I'm talking about the cost of research. But what is happening now? Many of these resources are getting digitized, and because these archives are not able to fund themselves, they are taking international funds and scanning them. And once again, knowledge is getting concentrated to the West. So the ability of producing knowledge relevant for South Asia, the resources necessary for producing knowledge about South Asia, is getting further concentrated to Western institutions. And we are handing them over. We are allowing the West to come with their money and take away these resources from us. Right? So we need to consider as to how we can stem this flow. And that is where I'll make this final point. This question of cost. Many of these processes, whether it be development of algorithm, the development of code, or models, or text analysis, or it be the very digitization, many of these, a large part of their expense is rent pay. You pay the large corporations, or you want to buy a scanner, they will sell it to you for 25 lakhs, but it has nothing much. You could have that scanner for as less as 3 lakh rupees, but no, we don't develop that technology or that know-how. And when that technology is developed by these large corporates, they place it under a copyright regime. Right? When they develop a certain algorithm, they'll place it under a copyright regime to use that particular resource. Right? You will have to pay a very hefty amount, whether it be JSTOR or it be Sage, or Gale. And copyright rent paying takes away, saps most of our institutional budgets. And therefore, I would like to argue that what the strategy that we should follow in the development of these kind of technologies, whether it be OCR technologies, whether it be text modeling technologies, whether it be digitization technologies, would be to not to abjure copyright and put it under Creative Commons licenses, put it under open licenses, so the cost of computing comes down. So I would say that if I have to sum up, what are the anxieties? The anxieties are that the influx of the documentary method, a documentary universe, onto the global south, if I may want to expand that definition, brought about a certain degree of violence, a violence on forcible creation of community identities and community differences, something that the global south is still dealing with. The dangers are that the coming of the digital might replicate that process and accentuate that process, because digital is far more effective than print, more exponentially. The rate of production of texts far more in the digital than it is in print. So therefore, what are the challenges? Challenges are to intervene in technology and not be some recipient of technology, but a creator of technology, to determine the technological direction and not allow Western institutions, Western funders determine the trajectory of the technology. So that's what I say, that the digital humanities for India, and in fact in digital humanities for the global south, needs to be very, very different from the digital humanities for the global north. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Professor Ghosh. So should we start our Q&A session then. I'd like to ask Tonisha. Tonisha?
Yeah, Purichata.
Okay, great. We circulated a Google form for questions and comments. As I can see, we have got only one question here so far for Professor Ghosh. Let me read out. How to approach theatre performances and literary texts in a digital way so as to unearth the undiscovered side of it. Putting it precisely, what is the role of DH in understanding theatre and other performing arts in a more inclusive manner? A concise example as how to do it from the point of view DH looks at things. So this is what it reads.
So, Poricha, this question is not really related to what I talked about today, but I will attempt an answer. Of course, there can be an answer, but it may not be something, it might be the subject of another lecture altogether. But, I want to look at 2 points. One is that the digital itself can be regarded as performative, right? Because on the digital, the way the social media functions, everybody puts forward a mask, a certain persona for the outer world, and that can be an aspect of performance. The other is, of course, the digital has brought back into the communication domain the idea of the ephemeral, which is actually the idea of performance. Performance is that which cannot be recorded, that which ceases to exist as at the moment it has come to fruition. It ceases to exist, right? So that is true also for the digital in many senses than one, uh, because every particular iteration of a particular text. So for example, if you have a social media text, as you watch it, it has in that thread something above it, something below it. What is above it and what is below it can change as time progresses. And the number of likes, number of comments can change. And now people can even edit their posts. So in that sense, the there are many ways in which the digital can retain the ephemeral. If you're talking about theater per se, theater uh, which is performed in a physical space by physical people and not avatars or handles. Uh, the way that the digital transforms at the present moment transforms or sort of extends that moment of performances through the camera, and the camera sort of renders that performance into a documentary, and it's no longer retains its performance characteristics. But one can imagine that there could be, through AR/VR technologies, there could be performances. In fact, there are already performances where participants can virtually participate in performances, and that could be an interesting aspect where, for example, many museums do undertake this. That you cannot physically go to the museum, but you can take a virtual reality tour of the museum. And we have already know that within the domain of performance studies, museum viewership is looked upon as a performative expression. Now, if you're going to encounter a museum or any architectural space or anything through virtual reality, then certainly that performance domain is is an exciting one. So this is what I can say for now.
Purichata, there's a long question in the chat box on WebEx.
Just a
Perhaps we
minute.
can take that.
I can't see it.
Should I just read it out?
Yeah, please, thank you. Because I can't find the question in the chat box. Can't locate it in the Google form either. Sorry about that.
No, please don't worry about it. So, Dr. Siddhartha Koduru has sent a question stating, considering that AI and machine language is part of DH, the language of which is based on coding, what feedback or inputs are needed to be incorporated into the process to make it more amicable for DH? Also, how can DH handle multivariant expression and interpretation when translating a manuscript? That's it.
Well, that's precisely what I was trying to get at, is that when I'm talking about various kinds of tools and techniques to be developed in the Indian languages for digital humanities, or computational text analysis for Indian language texts, I try to suggest that this is not a technology solution, technology only solution. It would require a multidisciplinary team to be able to produce these models, because at every level of production or development of these algorithms or models, the feedback of scholars of literature or history or sociology will have to be taken to figure out what kind of output these models are providing. For instance, if you look at a simple uh, tool like sentiment analysis, even in English language, you would find that there are many models which provide sentiment analysis. And your choice of a particular model for the sentiment analysis would be determined by what kind of results or what kind of biases you want to play with, because these algorithms do have a bias, we realize that. And according to what kind of reading we want, it's simply like choosing a methodology for research, right? So therefore these algorithms, when they are determined, when they are developed, and these technologies are not going to be developed and then there's an end. They'll continue to develop further. They will have to be part of an internal process of feedback through scholars, right? What was the second question? If you might repeat that for a moment, please.
Now I can see it in the Google form, and I can read out the entire one. Just a minute. So this is the question.
Just the second part, because the first part I've answered.
So first part was on this AI, machine language,
Yeah.
and DH, right? I think second part is what feedback or inputs are needed to be incorporated into the language processing process to make it more amicable for DH. Also, apart from coding, what skill sets are expected for an aspirant of DH?
No, coding is only partially a skill set. Of course, there is a need for a couple of things. If I can immediately say that, yes, you need to be able to read code, and if not to be able to read code as a developer, but at least as a user, right? It's like using your washing machine, right, or using your phone. Now, when you're using your phone, you are not a technology expert. You're just a sound. You are a user of that technology. You are not developing that phone. The developer of the phone is much more inside that inside your phone than you do. It's not only on the screen, but should to be able to use a phone, you should be able to know which buttons to press and all that. I don't think that requires a developer's knowledge, number one. So the approach to code should be, for a DH scholar, should be at least to be able to learn code enough to be able to read it, understand it, what it is doing, and be able to nominally use it, right? Not asking anybody to become a developer. Development always is a specialized computer science task, but computer scientists will have to get into collaboration with humanities and social science scholars in order to develop. It cannot be done in isolation. But other than that, other than code, a humanities scholar needs to be able to have the skill set of whatever traditional humanities scholarship does. We need to know our critical tools of critical analysis, which are native to specific disciplines. So literary scholars will have their literary theories, sociology scholars would have their ethnography field work, etc. And so therefore those are important schools. They are going nowhere. So domain knowledge is going nowhere. It has to be there. And the third thing that is important is a sense of media archaeology, to understand that technology is not stable, it is transient. And with technology, relationships change. To be able to understand that, because we are in a very, very fast changing world, the technology of today would be obsolete in maybe 4 or 5 years from now. So it's very important to understand that that infrastructure, to be able to, it's very important that scholars today learn how to learn more than to learn particular skills. I hope I can get my point across.
So there's a question posed by Mohmita Bala. What are the small initiatives the research scholars can take to mitigate this crisis in digital humanities?
I wonder which crisis Momita is talking about. I wonder if he is talking about the paucity of resources that I pointed out. If it is that, then I would say, I think we need to, first of all, many of us, I understand I'm speaking to a group of faculty members who are in some position to frame curriculum. So when you are framing curriculum, do keep in mind, do make some provision for students to be able to understand technology, digital technologies better. And when I say digital technologies, I am very, very clear that these should be designed for the humanities classroom. We cannot expect a humanities scholar to now go to a maths department or a computer science department and learn coding. No. Coding can be different for different people. For a biologist, coding does solves different sets of problems. For a physicist, it solves very different sets of problems. And if you mix and match both of them, or all disciplines, then the chances are that you're going to alienate the scholars. So specifically, technology courses will have to be designed for the humanities classroom. That's number one. Number two, I feel in the Indian academia, we have had one lacuna. The lacuna is that our institutions do not value archives. If you look at many Western institutions, universities, they have their own archives. Universities are scholarly places. Our students will go to somebody's house and read a certain book or set of collection, but then will not help in putting that together in some kind of an accessible archive or anything. We will not make our institutional resources and spaces available to make that archive available. You look at the situation of the one of the most important digital humanities institutions in this country, one of the earliest, which is the School of Cultural Texts and Records in Jadavpur University, who have done phenomenal work to actually put together a lot of community resources. I say community because it's the larger community in a digitized format, make it accessible. But they have a serious fund crunch today. I don't know what the state is, but about 6 or 7 months ago, there was a serious situation where SCTR was fighting for survival. That's a shame. That should not happen.
I can see a question from Gullo Kanu. Can digital humanities be also called in some sense mechanical humanities?
I don't know how to make sense of that question. I would say no.
And
Because if you are to say that mechanical means that without any critical intervention, then obviously not. Because when you are reading texts using using algorithms, as I have tried to maintain again and again, algorithms themselves have a certain bias, and which algorithm I choose or how I interpret the results of the algorithm is dependent on the domain knowledge of humanities scholars. So it is not mechanical. It's not I put in something in the slot machine and something comes. It's not like a toaster. If the toaster is mechanical, no.
I can see a question from Prakruti Bhatt. The internet or web often considered as a space that crosses boundaries of nationality, race, gender, etc. However, people often tend to forget while making such claims is that the internet was developed as a part of a war tactic. What would be your opinion on the projection of digital spaces as prejudice free and inclusive?
Yes. So the thing is, everything is developed through war for war tactic. Historically, all technology today, chances are that if you're buying a new mobile phone and you are going to use it for navigation, you will use a particular technology called Navik. This Navik technology was first developed by the Indian Armed Forces to preempt the possibility of other countries, particularly the USA, shutting down the GPS for Indian assault vehicles and rockets and everything after the Kargil War. Right? If you look at the history of most technologies, even computers, in Bletchley Park during the Second World War, Alan Turing and his team were involved in developing a mechanism through which they could crack the Enigma code of the Germans. That's what won the Second World War. Radar developed by the Germans. Even let us go all the way back. I mean, gunpowder technology, use of iron and steel. Use of iron and steel. I mean, I have an iron sword and you have a bronze sword. I can win the battle. So, all most technologies, cutting edge technologies, it is always the military which gets the greatest funds, and this is historically true. This is not something new. Yes, but what is important to be noted is that even though the ARPANET was created to respond to the nuclear Armageddon, the fact is, once it developed into the network, the internet, it did develop within an academic sort of exchange process, where the buzzword was information sharing. The reason why computers talk to each other, were able to talk to each other. Today, you have a situation where you buy a particular machine, and you can only, suppose you buy a gaming machine, you can play only games from that particular company, or you buy a particular shaving implement, you can only buy blades from that particular company. They won't fit, right? The fact is, computers share IP addresses, they share hypertext transfer protocol. The entire architecture of the way the TCP IP works is shared. The early browsers were shared. HTML was not under copyright, right? That is how the internet flourished. But unfortunately, today the internet is become a much more closed space than earlier, and much more proprietarial control over it, particularly the platform internet. So yeah, this is a battle of its own. So I wouldn't read too much into internet having developed in war. It's a question of what is the state of the technology today and how we make use of the knowledge that the internet is providing, internet technologies are providing.
So I can see a question from Mosim Mandal. Thank you for your thought-provoking lecture, sir. You rightly suggested that every student or researcher of humanities should have some working knowledge about coding so that they can critique the algorithms behind hate speech and fake news. But the kind of political scenario that we are living in, do you think we can afford to be optimistic to expect funding for such projects which develops the skill of critiquing? What is the way out?
So I don't know. I mean, there are funds. I mean, this faculty development project is funded, right? Parichaya, I imagine it has got some funds, and I am offering a critique of the position of digital humanities. This is possible. So if this is possible, then that is possible as well. We make use of resources which are available with us and live to see another day. That's what we do.
So the next question.
And just
Yeah, sure.
sorry to pause you. I mean, to be fair, I mean, the government of India is probably on the right tracks as far as enabling coding is concerned. Today, you are going to, in another few years, you are going to have a situation where every student that comes, a first year student who walks into the graduation classroom, they're probably going to come in already with some working knowledge of coding, right? Basic Python they will know, right? Hopefully that's how it is, because that's become part of the school curriculum, and thereon you have to take it on. You don't start on an empty slate completely. So I wouldn't think it is altogether that bleak, you know. And as far as in my own talking about developing Indian language resources, you know, the MeitY, the Ministry of Information Technology, etc., is investing quite a bit into projects for developing various kinds of tools for the Indian languages. It's just that we have to make sure that they are critiqued properly and they don't just replicate Western models here. The opportunities are there if we are willing to take a look at them. Yes.
Thank you. So the next question is from Dr. Madhurima Mukhopadhyay. From what I have understood of the 5-day session, DH is very inter and multidisciplinary. How can we develop collaborations among departments in the present university scenario to do justice to an emerging field like DH?
This is a concern. This is certainly a concern. Uh, Interdisciplinary research is the way forward. Not only in DH, in many other ways. Things like climate change, the big burning issues before our country today. Climate change is is a problem that cannot be solved by one particular discipline or any particular discipline in isolation, working in isolation. You need to work together. So, yes, my hope is, and there are institutions which are making, I mean, the IRDP in digital humanities in IIT Jodhpur is a result of that effort to actually bring together interdisciplinary platforms and force together interdisciplinary programs. So, so this is a question that will have to be taken to university leaderships, and really that is a struggle, an academic battle that scholars will have to work out in conference rooms, in seminars, in classrooms, in academic councils, etc. I mean, there is no doubt this has to happen.
I can see a couple of questions posed by Tonisha. Tonisha, would you like me to read them out, or would you like to ask them directly? Or before that, I think I can just sorry, Tonisha. Can I just go on with one other question that I can see here by Sanjeev Sahu?
Please do.
Yeah. Thank you. So, Sanjeev Sahu has asked, well, thank you, sir, for such an illuminating talk. How DH can play a crucial role in integrating the world while knowledge sharing and accessibility will be more feasible and affordable? What should be the role of a scholar in this regard?
Yeah, it will be more accessible because only if a few more things come into being. Right now, this accessibility question is also a question of languages. I mean, that's an aspect I did not touch upon in today's talk. Maybe will be an occasion to talk about later on at some other occasion. Is that the only way in which scholars across, even look at this FDP today, we are conducting it in English, and the English is a colonial language. Why are we doing it? We are doing it because we are we have, in the last 75 years or so, have not as a country invested in our languages. If I were to give this talk in Bangla, people outside the Bangla sphere would hardly be able to understand. If I were to give this talk in Hindi, there would be a sizable number of people who would not be able to catch everything that I say. That is the tragedy of the country today. This wasn't the situation of this country before the colonial times. Poets, when I began my talk, I referred to that. Poets would be writing in multiple languages, or they would be reciting their poetry to listeners of multiple languages. One could travel all the way from, let us say, Amritsar down to Nagpur or even further south and be able to communicate with each other. We have lost that ability as a country. We need to invest in our languages. Number one. Number two is we forget that there is a large part of the world with whom, even though we know English, we cannot communicate with. For example, the entire Latin America, which is where there is a kind of a parallel universe of scholarship in Spanish and Portuguese. Those ideas, I think, Poricha, you may want to talk about this a little bit. It would be good to hear you talk about it. Poricha himself is one rare scholar who actually has Latin America as center of his research. And he should be able to tell you about the hiatus between the Anglophone academia and the Portuguese and Spanish academy. We need to be able to bridge these beyond English or beyond the use of Hindi alone as a language. Poricha?
Thank you, Arjunda. So yesterday we were organizing a master class on publication strategies for research scholars in our IIT. And there, so I was supposed to talk about book publication, and a friend of mine from another IIT was talking about journal publication. And as I wanted to critique the Scopus obsession that we can see everywhere, so I gave them this specific example from the Francophone and the Hispanophone worlds, that many universities in South America, Latin America, if we go by ranking, I know that there might be many arguments against the idea of ranking, especially this global mammoth QS and other kinds of ranking systems. I'm not going towards that direction. But if we follow that for the time being, we can see that many universities in Latin America, they feature very strongly in QS, even though they publish only in Spanish or in Portuguese, and they have their own indexing systems, such as Latindex. So, which has got nothing to do with the typical Anglophone, this Anglophone centrality of certain indexing systems that are imposed on other parts of the world. So that is just one instance. And because of, so very recently, over the last few months, to be honest, I've been co-editing a book on Latin American cinema and its many transitions during the Cold War and after, with an Argentine colleague. And it is partially funded by my present institution. So I made clear that in this book, there will mostly be contributions from scholars who never published in English before. So we will gather the articles in Spanish, mostly in Spanish and occasionally in Portuguese, and then we will get them translated for the first time so that there is a some kind of a connecting platform between these Latino scholars and the Anglophone readership that remains largely ignorant about the existence of many other academic worlds. And they're very happy about it, and we can see this struggle, this battle between the two languages, English being the dominant one, and these Latinate languages down south being dominated even in their own field at times. So you can see that struggle being played out in forums such as LASA, Latin American Studies Association. I haven't been there ever, but I heard from my Latino colleagues that there's always a struggle. So the Latin American scholars who originated in South America, but then immigrated to the US, they prefer speaking and publishing only in English. Even when they're asked some questions in Spanish in LASA, they prefer to answer only in English, something that the Latino scholars based in Latin America always found very, very problematic. So we can see this happening, and of course that is related to the present economic situation down there. As you know, Argentina is facing its probably the most devastating economic challenge at the moment, with 40% people going under the poverty line. So, but yes, we can see this, and that's exactly why me being a South Asian scholar connect with scholars from another global South region so that we can have this South-South encounter. Otherwise, many of our premier institutions in India, IITs, JNU, Jadavpur, and other places, all of them have become, as I keep on saying, a transit lounge for the global north. So people wait to as long as their planes don't take off. So we should. I'm not going against that international exposure. What I'm trying to suggest is there should be more South-South encounter in all the fields that we can see. even in digital humanities. The other day, a research scholar in our IIT, Shamabhrata Roy, who was one of the speakers in this series, and he works on electronic literature and digital humanities. So he was asking me about elite and digital literature in Latin America. I provided him with some English materials, one book and one article, whatever is available in English that I would have access to. There might be many more that remain untranslated. That's all. Sorry for this long and somewhat scattered kind of an answer.
No, Poricha, that is really enlightening. I mean, this is really. I mean, Red DH in Mexico. You know, one of the things that they are doing is spearheading something that I just referred to in my talk. That is about minimal computing. That is, you should be able to engage in computing without this astronomical cost, this rent paying towards these corporations, which is just taking away, sapping our institutional budgets. Which is why we say that, okay, there's no funding. But you can, what you are paying 25 lakhs can be done for 3 lakhs. Why pay that 25 lakhs? You know, so that is the kind of intervention Red DH is making, and we have to have a cooperation with that kind of thing.
So I can see two questions posed by Tonisha. So I'm not sure what Tonisha wants. Should I read them out, or Tonisha, you want to ask Ajunda right now directly?
Porichayata, in the interests of fairness, why don't you read them out? I'm just a participant today.
Thank you. So, digital disenfranchisement amplifies pre-existing inequalities, including the geopolitical hierarchies of knowledge systems vis-a-vis the global north and south. When it comes to politics of archiving, we see a lot of South-South power relations at work too. Some of them rooted in colonial structures of meaning. How would you respond to these local concerns in the current scenario? This is Tonisha's first question. And the second one is,
Hold on, let me take this. I would forget the second question. No, power structures are there, and one thing that you talked about is the is digital access. Uh, yes, it is very much there, but one of the things is, of course, that the digit question of the access to the digital is again contingent on the costs of the digital. And I would argue that, look at what happened. Look at the situation that happened. Suddenly, once before there was this entire market, in places like UP and Haryana, where people would get mobile phones, but they needed to play music on it, but they did not have the bandwidth to download because data was expensive. So there were these shops, mobile shops, who would just load on people's phones any material to listen to, mostly songs. You say, okay, you load a folder full of songs for a little charge. They would load it on. That was the kind of universe that was there in existence maybe about 5 years back. And the moment Geo came in, that changed. Now nobody is bothered about data, right? So the the money that data was making just suddenly went down. It's another matter. The data doesn't now need the customer's money. It is making the customer himself the engine for producing money because of the data that is collected from customer usages. But the case in point is there are a lot of surplus. And it's important that we develop technology in such a way that future technologies will sort of undo the digital divide that you're talking about, right? That is part of the thrust, and that's why my emphasis on maintaining uh, knowledge especially knowledge, all kinds of knowledge, and especially knowledge of technology, digital technologies in the commons, right? And not behind paywalls, not behind proprietary walls. That probably can mitigate the concerns that you raised. That should be the strategy.
And there's one more question by Tanisha. I think this is a follow-up question. Also, poor technology, guerrilla technology, and infrastructures of injustice have been there as long as digital cultures have been, especially in the global south. What role do you see these subversive spaces creating?
Yeah, so as I was saying, I mean, there are these, so for example, things like torrents, or you have libgen. The interesting thing about that is this idea of distributed storage. The fact that there are mirrors across the world means that one can shut down one particular site, one particular mirror, but another mirror will immediately crop up, right? So this is talking about how an archive should remain in a distributed space, right? So uh, uh, so that it is not easy to sort of make that knowledge owned. Today we have a mechanism where there are these, maybe some funding which is provided for digitization of textual material, documentary material. But the agreement that is signed is that now it is under copyright of such and such organization, right? But it has been produced through public money. Why should it be under copyright? If it is going to be freely accessible on the internet, then anybody should be able to mirror it and run sites of their own if it has been produced through public money. And if it is mirrored at various places, today you find a particular government agency, and how many times have you seen this happen historically? A particular government agency is doing a bit of digitization work and storing it in their servers and owning copyright over it. 20 years down the line, that government agency, that national institution comes under a fund crunch and is handed over to a private entity. Of course, the archive inside a paywall. Right? What was so far publicly owned now becomes privately owned because copyright is owned by that particular national body. This is something we need to think about. We cannot put knowledge resources under copyright regime, especially knowledge resources which have been digitized from sources which are not already in copyright. Right? If you have a more than 100-150-year-old book which is not in copyright, why scan it and put those images under a copyright? Notably, it's under a public organization. It should not happen. So that's my viewpoint.
So I can't see any more questions in the Google form. Let me check it once again. No, Tanisha's questions were the last ones. So that's all, I guess. So thank you so much, Professor Ghosh, for being here with us today. But on that note, I'll hand it over to Dr. Srimoy Guha-Thakurta of Scottish Church College for the last part of this concluding session.
Thank you so much, Professor Ghosh, for today's session. It was very, very engaging, I must say. And I think fittingly it was the last one to kind of bring it all together in one thread. And thank you so much, Porichai, for your chairing today. I was supposed to introduce you formally, but you did not give me the chance, and you just took the show away. But nonetheless, you don't need any introduction. You're one of us, I guess, one of the hosts. Uh, since we are at the end of today's session, and since this is the last one we're going to have officially as part of the online FDP that we had arranged between the two institutions, we thought of having a very, very short valedictory, so that we could bring formally to an end what had started 5 Saturdays before. And we have some representations from both sides. Porichoy is representing IIT Jodhpur, and from Scottish Church College we have our Vice Principal, Dr. Supratim Das, and our IQAC coordinator, Dr. Shamgar Bhattacharya, has also joined us. If we can start, sir. Uh, uh, am I audible? Shukrutu sir? Okay. Right. So we will start with the short valedictory. But before that, this is for the participants. Again, a repetition of certain instructions that we have to, because we want to really do well by you as well. We are going to circulate today's video link, of course, along with the exercise and feedback. We have already shared the feedback link. Just an information, we have kept our feedback forms opened for some time, but we are going to close all the feedback forms on 20th September. And we are going to accept exercise answers and feedback till 20th September only. After that, we have to go through your responses to decide upon certification. So please cooperate with us and keep the last date in mind when you are filling up and doing your exercises. Thank you so much again for being with us for the 5 Saturdays. And now, if I can move ahead with the valedictory, first I would like to request our Vice Principal, Dr. Supratim Das. Yes, Varvi, you
Yeah,
want to
just
say
a
something?
clarification. Feedback form for session 3 will be closed today. Feedback form for session 3 will be closed today. And for session 4 and 5, we will close the feedback forms on 20th September. That is the clarification I wanted to. Please go ahead, Shrimul.
Thank you, Varvi. Dr. Dash, if you're ready, I would
Yes.
like to, yes, have the first word and say a few concluding remarks perhaps on this end.
Thank you, Srimoyi, and thanks to all the others here who are present today. So 5 virtual sessions of this FDP on introduction of digital humanities now are over. And I think all the sessions have been extremely successful. I could not attend most of the sessions, most of the previous sessions, but today, really with rapt attention, I was listening to the question answer session. And really, it was an experience. It was a pleasant experience for me, and I am sure for others. Particularly when Sri Arjun Ghosh, today's speaker, and Porichoy, our student, they were in a dialogue which reminded me of some of the theories. For example, one that refers to the notion of the waiting room of history. So this definitely can bring us to another domain of polemics, controversies, debates, and discrepancies, and theoretical interventions. But this is really not the place now, and I'm not the person now to say any more on this. But the question answer session and particularly the variety of questions that I heard today and the questions that were really being addressed so competently, it made me very sure that really there is a strong silver lining at the end of this series of sessions. We must remember that this is just, we have just, these IIT Jodhpur and Scottish Church College these two institutions, they have just initiated a beginning. This is just a beginning. And as far as traditional humanities are concerned, we see that, yes, there are umpty number of researches, there are so many archival interventions, there are contradictory theories and so on. But the point is that what comes out of this series of lectures or sessions, that is the interdisciplinary focus. I am sorry to say that even particularly in Kolkata or maybe in many other parts of India, uh, this has not been the thrust area of higher studies or teaching and learning. That is the interdisciplinary approach. So this is one thing, that the interdisciplinary approach that should be really disseminated to the learners, to the students, to the researchers, and of course to the faculty members in different institutions. Number one, this approach is very important. Number two, that is digital. I remember when I first started my PhD work at Jadavpur University, and when I had for the first time, I had my access to the digital library, and I had access to, now this has been a cliche, but at that time, at the say in 2003, 4, or even before that, it was really an experience that I have been given free access to different digital archives like Gestor and others, literature online. Those are old things. Now we have moved so far. But mind it, with that experience, I could understand that if we cannot perfectly have a blend of our approach of humanities, and particularly interdisciplinary approach of humanities on the one hand, and number two, our hard skills, not just soft skills, but hard skills, if we cannot make a perfect blending of these two, it is very difficult for us to really go ahead with any kind of knowledge system or research. Mind it that many of our teachers, they are doing excellent work abroad. Many of my friends are doing excellent work abroad because they can access to anything and everything they want to under one roof. But even today, we cannot do this. And there was a question that was raised here in these discussions and dialogues, that the question of copyright. Yes, really, we who try to do some research, particularly using modern technologies, modern hard skills, we face this every day, almost every day. Copyright, and and naturally there are clandestine methods. And so the whole world of IT, it has really today, it is unfortunate, but it's true, it has been flooded with clandestine connections and access. So we are to face all these things. But our motto is how to move on from this virtual platform to a real platform. That is no more online platforms, but rather offline exchanges, because that is the purpose. That is the purpose of this kind of FDP, and particularly, I think that is the major thrust area behind the agreement, the academic agreement, uh, according to the MOU, between Jodhpur IIT and Scottish Church College, that we have to proceed, we have to go ahead. And this is just a beginning. So with this beginning, now we can proceed and we can think big. We can think of many other projects, and how to think and what to think and how to do and what to do. That I am very confident to leave to my junior colleagues in Scottish Church College, and to the faculty members from Jodhpur IIT, including our student Porichai. So I wish all the very best, and I am sure, at least from today's series of questions and the way the questions were addressed, that this short sessions, 5 short sessions, have been to some extent very successful. So with these few words, I wish all the best, and I congratulate all the organizers who are behind this. I know that they are all the time we risked technological glitches, but still we have come forward, and I only hope that next time it will be offline and not virtual, not online. Our faculty members, our students, they may visit IIT Jodhpur, and their faculty members and their students and their research scholars, they may come here to Kolkata, and definitely I will be looking forward to that. Thank you.
Just a minute. Sorry for the intervention, but and thanks so much, Professor Dash. But our today's speaker, Professor Ghosh, wants to leave the session. He has other engagements. So on that note, I'd like to thank Professor Ghosh again for being here with us and for delivering the talk on behalf of the organizing team of the FDP. And he's definitely not an outsider. He has been working with us for the last 2 years and helped us a lot in forming the MSc curriculum that we run here. So, but nice to meet him after a long time. So on that note, I'd like to thank him again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Parishda.
Thank you, Professor Ghosh.
Sorry, I have to leave.
All right. So back to our purpose, that is bringing this session and today's or rather this FDP to an end. Thank you, Professor Dash, for your encouragement and the confidence that you showed in your younger colleagues. But uh, uh, your note at the end was also very true. We still have a long way to go. It's still a long way to learning and still a lot to explore. And we're very happy that we have IIT Jodhpur and the DH community there with us to help us out and to partner with us always. And we hope that we can continue on this journey. Porichai, on behalf of IIT Jodhpur, I would like you to say a few words and some concluding remarks on this FDP.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta and Professor Dash. So I'd like to thank someone who is not here with us today, but delivered a talk as a part of the FTP, Dr. Moirakshi Choudhury, my former colleague who initiated the DH program and the research platform in IIT Jodhpur. And the MOU process was initiated by her when she was the coordinator. So I'd like to acknowledge that. I took over the coordinatorship after she stepped down in 2021, and she left our institute in 2022, but we are still in very good touch. And in Pune, she is currently with Flem University, Pune. So in Pune, it's going to be another hub for DH with Savitribai Phule Pune University coming up with new DH programs. Flem has its own PhD program. So when DH started in India, it was limited to a handful of places. Jadavpur organized the very first DH related research project at the SCTR, School of Cultural Texts and Records, because Jadavpur had its advantages. The English professors took the initiative and they received the necessary support from the computer science department. Many other state universities don't have that kind of a platform where the STEM faculty members and humanities faculty members can collaborate. So it started like that, and then it spread across India, but then, even then, it was limited to mostly to certain IITs like Delhi and Indore, and IIM Indore as well, and a few other central institutions like Aligarh Muslim University and Jamia, and some other places where they have specific faculty members specializing in it. But so it started as a more of a collective of a handful of individuals who started an association, an alliance, and they started supervising PhD projects, churning out research scholars so that they can come up with even more sophisticated research projects in near future. That's how it began. But now DH has become a buzzword, especially with the arrival of NEP 2020. Because NEP intends all the institutions across India to be more interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary by nature. And all the curricula across the nation are gradually undergoing massive changes, transformations. It's a very transitional phase. And DH and several other interdisciplinary programs are gradually taking shape. Energy humanities, environmental humanities, plant humanities, and so on. And what Scottish Church College has done today in collaboration with us is something very, very significant, because as far as I can recall, and as I'm still in touch with many of my friends and colleagues in Calcutta and other parts of Bengal, DH is, even though, as I said, it's spreading all over India at the moment. In Calcutta and in some other parts of eastern India, it's not that common. Not much DH research is happening. So School of Cultural Texts and Records, as Professor Arjun Ghosh rightly pointed out, they did phenomenal work, but now they're struggling for their survival because of funding issues, something that plagues many other state universities. So we need more collaborations. The issue that came up, that was raised by the participants today, that more collaborative ventures should be there between central and state and private institutions, so that we can have more such programs. As Professor Supratim Das mentioned, we should move from this online venture to an offline, in-person kind of a program where we can connect better and connect more. There should be exchange programs and so on. So on that note, I'd like to thank everyone in the organizing team again. Despite being the coordinator, I didn't play much of a role here. Dr. Tonisha carried out all the responsibilities possible on behalf of our institute. I don't know how to thank her. And the Scottish Church team, Dr. Srimoy and Dr. Bharvi, both of them offered us enough support. I would like to thank our research scholars, all the speakers, 5 speakers, some of them being very senior scholars like Professor Ghosh or Dr. Moirakshi, some of them being early career researchers like Shanmuda Priya, who is a postdoc scholar, or Shamyabrata Roy, who is yet to complete his doctoral research. So we offered a platform to the senior scholars and early career researchers, junior scholars. So, and of course, I'd like to thank the tech support team in our computer center, who sort of saved us. So we faced many challenges on the very first day, and then the tech support team saved us. So on that note, I'd like to conclude this brief closing remark or whatever, and I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Srimoy once again.
Thank you so much, Professor Patra. Before I end and hand over the mic to our IQAC coordinator, Dr. Tomar Bhattacharjee, for the official vote of thanks, but as one of the coordinators, I would also like to personally thank my co-coordinators, Dr. Varvi Roy and Dr. Tonisha Guin, especially Tonisha, because I lifted a heavy portion of the technological aspect of this online FTP. So thank you so much for all the trouble that you took, and glitches and technological, such mishaps may happen. But the fact is that we had 5 fabulous, fantastic, extremely informative sessions, and that was our objective. When we started off and when we had an initial meeting with Professor Patra and Dr. Green, that is something that me and Dr. Roy insisted, that what we wanted to have was something very, very introductory, because we want people to know that there is something called DH and what it is all about. Those are the questions that we wanted to address. And I think the way that the sessions were organized, the way that the titles were decided upon, and the way then the lectures were carried out, they truly met our, our objective in conducting and organizing this FDP. So thank you so much to our partner organization. Now I would like to ask our IQAC coordinator, Dr. Shomrat Bhattacharjee, to deliver the official vote of thanks and bring today's session and the FDP to an end. Dr. Bhattacharjee.
Thank you, Shnoy. At the very onset, I would like to thank the director of IIT Jodhpur, Dr. Shantanu Chaudhary, for all his support towards collaborating with Scottish Church College and towards organizing this faculty development program. I would like to express my gratitude towards all the resource persons, Professor Arjun Ghosh, Dr. Mayurakshi Chaudhary, Mr. Shamubrata Roy, Dr. Shanmuga Priya, and Dr. Tonisha Guin for taking their sessions. My token of appreciation to the chairpersons of these sessions, Dr. Natasha Tudam, Dr. Mona Lisa Basu, Dr. Riddhi Bhattacharya, Dr. Tonisha Gui, and Dr. Purichoy Patro. A special mention of Dr. Purichoy, as he has played an instrumental role in the tie-up between IIT Jodhpur and Scottish Church College. I would take this opportunity also to thank the Principal of Scottish Church College, Dr. Madhumanjari Mondal, the Vice Principal, Dr. Shupratim Das, and all the members of the Internal Management Committee for rendering all their assistance. Ladies and gentlemen, I will be failing in my duty if I do not put on record my deepest sense of appreciation towards the coordinators of this faculty development program, Dr. Tonisha Gui, Dr. Srimoy Guho Thakurta, and Dr. Varbi Roy, for their very sincere, meticulous, and hard work. Last but not the least, I would like to thank all the participants for their active participation. You have really been a wonderful and supportive cohort. Thank you all for your support, and please excuse us for any difficulties or issues that you might have faced during the course of organizing this program. Once again, thank you all and have a wonderful evening ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Bhattacharjee. And we also like to thank you as well for your constant support. Anytime we give any advice, Dr. Bhattacharjee always obliges us with his very good advice, I will say. So thank you again for being with us. Thank you to all the participants. Thank you for being with us, for sticking with us in spite of the glitches on the first day. And we will still remain connected through email because we still have work to do. You still have work to do. And Dr. Gwyn will make sure of that. And we will be giving you out certificates. But as I said, please give us a bit of time for that because we need to sort things out a bit. Before I end, if my co-coordinators would like to say a few words, they can.
Barbiti?
I can only say thank you, Tonisha. Thank you so much. Will you please close the FDP
session?
It has been a huge and amazing learning experience for all of us. And I can't thank the participants enough for sticking out with us. We were trying to do something initially and we wanted to make it as open access as possible. But the response was overwhelming to begin with, and it sustained itself, which was very heartening to see. You will hear from me. Please remember that 20th September is the last date to submit the exercises and the feedback forms. Give us till the end of this month, if not a few more days in October, to finalize the certificates. And I really hope that this is a beginning of a longer conversation. Thank you so much. I wish everyone a very good Sunday. Thank you.
Thank you.